Well, this is a video I didn't plan on making for a while, but when your friend calls you on opening night telling you there's a ticket for Endgame going spare, what can you do? I can't think of any movie in recent memory that's had such enormous expectations, hype, fears, concerns, conspiracies and conjectures heaped on it as Endgame. Hell, even I'm guilty of it. I've made no secret of the fact that I consider Infinity War the best movie in the MCU, and that it pretty much revived the series that was growing stale and predictable. But Endgame was another level altogether. Whereas Infinity War was a brilliant penultimate stepping stone on the journey, Endgame was always the final destination. It's the culmination of everything that's been building up for the past 10 years. All the work, all the adventures, all the world building and the storytelling and the hype and the endless speculation and debate, all of it would come down to one simple question. Is Endgame worth it? Well, yeah, it is. Mostly. Endgame is a movie that left me feeling kind of confused when I left the cinema, but not for the reasons you might think. Normally I form my opinions of a movie pretty quickly, but Endgame left me struggling to settle on a final consensus, partly because there's so much to it, it's hard to take it all in one go, and partly because it's difficult to untangle it from all the hype and the comparisons to what came before. And it's only as I did this review and really sorted through the events of this film that I was able to understand what worked and what didn't. Before I deliver my verdict, I'm going to do my best to summarise the plot and the events of this film so I can put my remarks into some kind of context, which is no easy task when the movie itself is longer than the amount of sleep I've had in the past 48 hours. But what the hell, we all have to suffer for our art, I suppose. If you're not into spoilers, then skip to this time code for my overall summary and my thoughts on the film. Otherwise, let's dive in and discuss what happens. So Endgame picks up a few weeks after the battle with Thanos at the end of Infinity War. Tony's trapped aboard Star-Lord's ship with Nebula in deep space. They've exhausted their supplies and run out of options, and there's nothing left to do now except wait for the end to come. Tony's on the verge of death when all of a sudden Captain Marvel magically finds him and brings him back to Earth to reunite with the Avengers. This isn't looking good. So they all want payback for what Thanos did, and they need the Infinity Gauntlet so they can bring back all the people that he zapped. And as it happens, Nebula knows where they can find him because he told her all about it when she was growing up. Not too smart really, Thanos. So they all head to Thanos' retirement planet and they ambush him, and Thor kills him by slicing his head off. Nice work guys, the beers are on me tonight. Wait, what? What do you mean there's more? Oh, for fuck! But it turns out that killing Thanos in the present doesn't help much because he destroyed the Infinity Stones to stop anyone else undoing his previous actions. They might have beaten their enemy, but they've still failed in their mission, so the Avengers go home defeated. Flash forward 5 years, and everything's a bit shit now. Rather than thriving as Thanos predicted, Earth is really struggling with the loss of half its population. Everyone's depressed and whole areas of cities are crumbling and deserted wastelands. It's a bit like Detroit then. What's left of the Avengers are trying to hold things together, and Black Widow's overseeing it all because really she's got nowhere else left to go. Tony and Thor are both gone, and Hawkeye's become a crazed vigilante after losing his whole family to the Snap. Captain Marvel also leaves because there's lots of planets that need her help more than Earth, so she'll be gone for most of the movie. Nice one, Russo brothers. But then Ant-Man suddenly returns from the quantum realm. He's been trapped there for the past 5 years, but from his point of view it's just been a few hours because time's all messed up there, I guess. So he suggests using this technology to go back in time and stop Thanos before he was able to kill everyone. The Avengers ask for Tony's help, but he's retired with a wife and kid, and he's not willing to risk it all on a long shot like this. But then he changes his mind, and they build a fully functional time machine in like 2 days, and then they're ready to go. They also rope in Thor, who's now a miserable drunkard living in the middle of nowhere, playing video games all day. Now obviously I take a dim view of that kind of thing, so I was pretty mad to see him acting like this. They also recruit Bruce Banner, who's kind of permanently fused with the Hulk, so he retains his Hulk strength and Banner's intelligence. It's like the best of both worlds. He explains that they can't stop Thanos from using the gauntlet in the past, or just kill him before he got the stones, because it's a different timeline, so changes to that one won't affect theirs. So even if you killed a past version of yourself, for example, it wouldn't cause you to stop existing because your timeline's unchanged. Oh, Mahler's gonna have a field day with this one. So the plan is to find the 6 Infinity Stones before Thanos gets them in the past, put them in a new gauntlet and use it to restore everyone in the present. Then return the stones to their original place and time so everything can go back to normal. Confused? Good, me too. The team splits up to go to the various times and places. Tony, Banner, Ant-Man and Cap go after 3 of the stones on Earth during the Battle of New York. Thor and Rocket go after another stone on Asgard during Thor 2. Nebula and Rhodey go for the one on Morag that Star-Lord discovered, and Black Widow and Hawkeye go for the Soul Stone. This is where things start to go a bit wrong. Because you have to sacrifice something you love to get the Soul Stone, Hawkeye and Black Widow fight over who should be the one to die, in what I have to admit is one of the absolute highlights of the movie for me. It's a scene that's tense, dramatic, unpredictable and heartbreaking as each character tries to sacrifice themselves, but the other uses increasingly desperate ways to stop them. Eventually Black Widow succeeds though, and Hawkeye returns with the Soul Stone, devastated by her death. Well, not sure how that Black Widow movie's gonna play out now. The New York team also get 2 of their stones, even if it does involve Cap pretending to be a Hydra agent and fighting, well, himself. But they lose the Tesseract in the chaos, so they have to travel back further to the 1970s to get it when it was being stored in some military camp when S.H.I.E.L.D. was just starting up. Jesus, how many times has that fucking thing appeared in these movies? Anyway, Tony has a scene with his 1970s dad, and Cap spots Peggy Carter, who somehow looks exactly like she did in Captain America, even though she's a quarter of a century older. Ah, whatever. But all is not well. Rhodey and Nebula manage to get their stone, but because there's now 2 Nebulas in the same time period, their brains link up somehow, and past Nebula starts seeing present Nebula's conversations. This allows past Thanos to scan her memories and uncover the Avengers' entire plan. He knows he's going to succeed at using the Infinity Stones in the future, and he knows they're now here trying to stop him. Wow, that was lucky for him. I mean, the whole rest of the movie basically relies on Nebula going haywire just when she happens to be around Thanos, and this random link-up just happens to play out a really vital, incriminating snippet of conversation that totally clues him into what's happening. What are the odds, eh? Like, if this had happened while Thanos was somewhere else, or if it had just played a visual of Nebula like walking down a hallway, or watching TV, or taking a dump, he'd have been totally none the wiser that any of this stuff was going on. Ah, whatever. Since he realises the Avengers are now basically doing his job for him by collecting all the Infinity Stones, Thanos captures present Nebula and he follows them back to Earth through the time portal thingy. So the Avengers reunite at their headquarters in the present. They put the stones in a new gauntlet and Banner uses it to snap his fingers and restore everyone. But just then Thanos travels through the quantum realm with his big battle cruiser and he flattens the whole Avengers compound. But everyone's alive in the rubble, somehow. Okay, I can buy guys like Thor and Banner being able to survive an assault like this, but regular humans like Hawkeye and Ant-Man? Really? Ah, whatever. So Thanos dispatches past Nebula to retrieve the gauntlet while he sits and waits for her to bring it to him. Hawkeye finds the gauntlet and he's trying to get it back to the time machines so they can return the stones to their various time periods. But past Nebula stops him and then present Nebula shows up and there's a fight and past Nebula gets killed. Wow, lucky for that whole different timeline thing, otherwise present Nebula would have just blinked out of existence. Anyway, Tony, Thor and Cap show up to take on Thanos themselves. Each of them goes at him with everything he has. Bombs, missiles, repulsor blasts, lightning, hammers, axes, even hand-to-hand combat. And holy shit, my cinema fucking erupted when Cap started using Thor's hammer like an absolute boss. It's a brilliant callback to Age of Ultron when he almost managed to lift it off a table. But despite everything they throw at him, Thanos just can't be stopped. He knocks out Thor and Tony, leaving only Cap standing alone, injured and exhausted, his shield broken, his body damaged and beaten. Thanos summons his entire army to decimate Earth, telling Cap he was wrong with his plan to wipe out half the universe. This time he's gonna destroy everything and just start again. But just as he's about to finish Cap off, the rest of the Avengers arrive. And I mean everyone. Every character that was wiped out by Thanos, every character that's ever been in these movies appears for this last epic battle. What happens next is something that's pretty difficult for me to describe. Basically, if you take every final battle from all the previous Avengers films, stick them in a blender and add a shot glass full of adrenaline, you still won't even come close to this. Everyone gets their shot. Everyone gets a chance to shine and use their special moves. Jesus, even Pepper Potts is there in a suit of Iron Man armor. Or is it Iron Woman? Iron Person? I don't really know. The real focus of all this chaos and destruction is the gauntlet. Thanos is fighting to get his hands on it, and everyone else is trying to stop him, but he batters his way through them one after another, just like he did in Infinity War. Even Captain Marvel can't stop him. So he gets the gauntlet and he snaps his fingers, but Tony's removed the stones without him seeing, so he implants them into his own armor, and with a final defiant look at Thanos, he snaps his fingers. Thanos can only watch as his entire army disintegrates around him, just as he did to the Avengers in the last movie. Everything he worked to achieve has been undone. He lowers himself to the ground, defeated, pondering his failure, and then slowly fades into dust as well. Tony, mortally wounded by the use of the gauntlet, dies peacefully with his wife and friends by his side, a fulfilled man, secure in the knowledge that the people he loves and cares about will be safe. Tony, I raise my glass to you, my friend. After his funeral, Cap uses the time machine one last time to return the stones to their original time periods, but instead of coming straight home, he decides to stay in the past and he lives out his days with Peggy Carter, showing up in the present eventually as an old man, happy and content with the life he finally got to live. He passes on his shield to Falcon, and the movie ends with a final shot of him and Peggy in the 1940s, dancing happily together in their home. And that's it, that's the plot of Endgame. Now what do I actually think about it? Well, I said at the start of this review that I walked out of the cinema feeling a bit confused about my feelings towards this film, struggling to draw a definite conclusion one way or the other. There were things that worked and things that didn't, and as hard as I tried, I couldn't help but compare this movie to Infinity War. When that movie ended, I had to pick my jaw up off the floor when I left the theatre. It had shaken the very core of the Avengers universe, delivered a stunning ensemble performance from the biggest cast of characters I'd ever seen, flipped effortlessly between funny, tragic and dramatic, and introduced the most powerful and well-developed villain in the MCU, and generally left me on a complete emotional high. I expected a similar, if not better, experience with Endgame, but for all the brilliant moments it does deliver, it never quite reaches the heights of its predecessor. The finale is bigger, to be sure, there's more pomp and spectacle than you could ever ask for, but it just doesn't seem quite as smart, quite as bold, quite as unpredictable as Infinity War was. I might as well start with the biggest issue here, the time travel. This plot occupies the whole middle chunk of the movie, and honestly, it's the weakest aspect of the film by far. It goes on for too long and it tries to deliver so many character moments that it kinda kills the momentum and the sense of urgency. They're supposed to be in a literal race against time to recover the Infinity Stones before Thanos catches up with them, and instead we're spinning our wheels in the 1970s while Tony banters with his dad. It feels like self-indulgent padding that really should have been cut back. Generally, I'm not a fan of movies or TV shows that rely on time travel, apart from the obvious, of course, to resolve their storylines. It's the kind of cheap trick you pull out of your arse when you've written yourself into a corner and you can't think of any other way to solve a problem. It also opens up a whole Pandora's box of unwelcome possibilities and paradoxes, because once you establish past events as something that can be changed and manipulated, well, they lose impact because you realise that anything bad can simply be undone. Nothing matters because nothing's permanent anymore. The movie tries its best to get around the paradox aspect with the multiple timelines explanation, but honestly, it still feels like a bit of a cop-out. I also didn't like the constant revisiting of previous events and characters, like the Battle of New York, or the Ancient One, or Star-Lord's discovery of an Infinity Stone. I'm all for clever callbacks and little reminders to previous adventures, but when you're literally reusing footage and events from previous movies and having your present day characters try to sneak and maneuver around them, it feels kinda cheap and tacky in a way I've never experienced with an Avengers movie before. Wrapping the plot of Endgame so tightly around the events of other films makes it seem like it's using them as some kind of shield, like it doesn't have a strong enough storyline to sustain itself. One of the real highlights of Infinity War for me was the exploration of Thanos as a villain, his drives, his personality and motives. He was a compelling villain because he had a clear objective and an understandable motivation for pursuing it. He wasn't an evil man, he was a pragmatist who saw things on a scale nobody else could even comprehend, prepared to do unthinkable things for the greater good, and the movie was smart enough to ask the question of whether his perspective might actually be right. He didn't hate or even care that much about the Avengers. They were just obstacles for him to overcome to complete his mission. He felt genuine remorse for killing Gamora, and he even showed respect to Tony for the brave fight he put up. But here, he's a more simplistic kind of villain who now wants to destroy all life in the universe because one group of enemies refused to accept what he'd done. Like, his entire worldview has changed just because a handful of guys are fighting him again. He's also now got a real personal hatred for the heroes and Earth, because I guess they had to raise the stakes and remove all doubt that Thanos was wrong and needs to be destroyed. It cheapens him in a way, because all the nuance and depth of character that made him so compelling is kinda gone now. Speaking of characters, I really don't know what they were going for with Thor. Infinity War turned him into an absolute boss. He'd finally come into his own and discovered his true power, but now he's fat and drunk and he looks like the Big Lebowski, and he suffers from panic attacks when he has to confront a previous love interest. What the fuck? Chris Hemsworth spent 3 movies trying to find a winning strategy with Thor, and now that he's done it, they've turned the guy into a total clown. It's weird, and I don't really understand what purpose it's supposed to serve here. But now let's talk about the wooden elephant in the room. There's been a lot of concern that Captain Marvel would overshadow this movie, outshining everyone by being totally overpowered and even killing Thanos herself. Christ, if that had happened, I really would have quit the MCU for good. The bad news is that Brie Larson is just as boring, wooden and unlikable as ever. Her character still has all the warmth and charisma of a sparring dummy, and she's still OP as fuck. The good news is that she's in the movie for like 5 minutes at most, and she has no meaningful arc or interactions with the other characters. She saves Tony at the start and she shows up for the big rumble at the end, but she's basically absent for the rest of the film. Though there is one pretty obnoxious scene where she has to fight through a bunch of enemies, and every female character in the movie magically bands together to help run interference for her. Wow, lucky they all happen to be in that particular area of the battlefield at that particular moment. It's completely shameless feminist fan service, if there is such a thing, and it's one of those scenes you kinda just have to grit your teeth and get through. Her presence feels like a token gesture in this film, like the writers thought, well, I guess we have to give her something to do. And as it turns out, they don't give her all that much. So you can rest easy that she certainly doesn't ruin this film. But that's enough negativity for me. Let's talk about the positives, of which there are many. Well, it goes without saying that Endgame looks and sounds amazing. Spectacle is something that Marvel nailed years ago, and they certainly never dropped the ball here. The final battle, where our reunited heroes join forces against Thanos and his army, is something I just can't give enough props to. I've published 8 novels and written literally millions of words of descriptive text in my life, and even I don't have the adjectives to properly express the enormity, the ambition, the cinematic mastery, the sheer balls to the wall epicness of this scene. Every character gets their moment to shine. Every hero gets a chance to make a difference, even in the smallest way. It's quite simply brilliant to watch, the kind of thing that fanboys will be obsessing over for years. Everyone involved, with one obvious exception, gives it everything they have here. Props in particular to Scarlett Johansson and Jeremy Renner. Their scenes together are perfectly played, and you feel the connection between these two characters when you never really have before. I don't want to spoil things, but I think you can guess what scenes I'm referring to. A big mention as well must go to Robert Downey Jr. Tony Stark's always been my favourite Avenger ever since the very first movie. He's the guy who basically started it all, and probably come the furthest in terms of character development. It's been fascinating to see him go from a selfish and narcissistic playboy to a reluctant warrior, a determined protector, and finally a loving and compassionate family man. He's made mistakes every step of the way, to be sure. He's stumbled and fallen, but every time he's learned and atoned for what he did, and watching him make his final choice in Endgame just felt like the perfect resolution for his character. I could go on, picking apart and analysing every scene and plot point of this movie, but I'll leave that job to other more competent reviewers, and instead I'll settle for delivering what passes for my conclusion here. Endgame is a confident and solid movie that delivers a satisfyingly epic, poignant and powerful conclusion to the MCU. It successfully passes the torch on to the next generation while paying proper respect to those hanging up their capes for the last time. It's a movie that delivers moments of absolute wonder and emotional impact. It may play things a little safe at times, and there are also moments where it feels kind of flabby and self-indulgent, and there's a sense that it's not quite as smart or quite as impactful as its predecessor, but it's still head and shoulders above pretty much anything else out there. And let's be honest, if you're an MCU fan, then there's not much chance you won't watch it, so go get it done, and tell them the drinker sent you. And that's all I have for today. Go away now.